Good afternoon and welcome to this Florida College Access Network webinar entitled Meet Alice. A look at Florida's financially struggling population. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this FCAN webinar series entitled Meet Alice, a look at Florida's financially struggling population and how communities are using data for change. I've met some of you before, but in case you don't know who I am, my name is Kimberly Lent. I'm a Senior Research Associate with Florida College Access Network. Here you can find my email address and my Twitter handle, so that's @KRLent. And throughout the webinar, you can feel free to tweet at me, and we'll give you some other Twitter handles to go through and engage with us during the webinar. So today I'm very excited to introduce Ted Granger, who is the president of United Way of Florida. And you can tweet at him at United Way FL. And then also Holly Bullard, who's the interim co-executive director at the Florida Policy Institute and is also a member of the Alice Research Advisory Committee. You can tweet at Holly Bullard FL, or at Florida Policy Institute at Florida Policy. Throughout the webinar, we want you to interact with us, and you'll see on your side panel you can ask questions. So please submit your questions throughout. There's two options that we're going to go through. So sometimes if a question is really pertinent to one of our speakers, I will interrupt them and ask the question then. If not, the questions will be addressed in the final 15 minutes of the webinar. We also want you to engage with us and share on social media. So you can tweet at Florida College Access, at Florida College Access, hashtag FCAN, and then hashtag Meet Alice. And we will make the recording and all materials of for this webinar available within a week, usually within 72 hours of the event. So if you want to reference back to it, you'll get that, and you can also share it with your colleagues. So if you are new, welcome to your first Florida College Access webinar. We're just going to go over a little bit about what FCAN's about. So our mission is to create and strengthen a statewide network that catalyzes and supports communities to improve college and career readiness, access, and completion for all students in Florida. And our vision to go along with this is that at least 60% of working age Floridians will hold a high quality post-secondary degree or credential by the year 2025. And we chose this vision because labor economists have said that by 2025, at least 60% of jobs in Florida will require some form of education beyond a high school degree. However, we just got new data, which is very exciting. We got new data about degree attainment in Florida. So currently, 48.3% of Floridians have this education. And by the year 2025, at our current growth rate, we will be at 53%, which will fall short of the 60% required. So a little bit more about our work. Our work falls within three arms. The first is through local college access networks, or what we refer to as LCANs. LCANs are place-based initiatives that bring together a cross-sector of community members who set a goal on post-secondary degree or attainment and then set strategies to achieve that goal. This map shows current coverage of our LCANs, and currently 78% of Floridians live in an area that's supported by a local college access network. The second arm of our work is research and policy. This is where I primarily live. At FCAN, we use research and data and do some policy analysis to look at the current state of post-secondary education, trends that are affecting college access and success. And then we like to create materials such as the degree attainment one-pagers that are featured on this slide to help local communities and our legislators and other stakeholders use data to drive change. The third arm of our work is our statewide initiatives known as College Ready Florida. Currently, under our suite of initiatives, we have 4 campaigns that target the behaviors in that transition from high school to college or post-secondary institution of a student's choice. So currently we have Apply Yourself Florida, which focuses on applications to post-secondary education, the Florida FAFSA Challenge, which encourages students to fill out a FAFSA to get the financial support that they might need to attend post-secondary education, College Decision Day to celebrate students once they make that choice, and then Planet Florida, which is a new initiative that focuses on younger grades to expose them to the different pathways after high school. So as I said, we are really excited to have Ted and Holly here to talk about the Alice report and another way of looking at citizens or residents who are struggling to make ends meet in Florida beyond our typical poverty rates. So I wanted to go over a little bit of how this connects to FCAN's work in the larger field of college access success and post-secondary degree attainments. So on the left hand of your slide, you'll see a chart that includes median earnings by education. One of the things that research has showed is that education beyond high school typically translates to a higher earning potential for residents. So you can see here that those who have a certificate or higher are earn significantly more than those with a high school diploma or less. And the average, this is 2017 data, the average earnings in Florida was $33,572. And you can see looking at this, there is quite a big jump when you go from credential to credential, which also gets into the advocacy around stackable credentials and how you can use one degree and leverage that to get a further degree. On the right hand of the screen, we have degree attainment by county. So degree attainment, as we measure it, is in this slide, is residents who have a 2-year degree or higher. This map right here shows it by county. So we have a heat map. Those with the darker blue have higher rates of degree attainment in their county. And currently, this does not include certificates or certifications, as we do not have a good method of tracking those at the county level. And to give you a greater picture of how these issues relate to Alice and how they relate to, tracking food insecurity and housing insecurity in Florida and throughout the greater nation, in the 2017-18 school year, we know that from those students who submitted a FAFSA application, which is the application for financial aid, 52% of those in Florida were Pell eligible. So that's 52% of students who are eligible for the Pell Grant, which is a grant and money that students do not have to pay back like a loan, but to support their education after high school. Also, the Wisconsin Hope Lab recently released their Still Hungry and Homeless in College report. And this is looking at national data. So looking at students throughout the country who attended a 2-year institution, 42% said that they were food insecure within the last 30 days, which is a pretty high number of students who don't have the access to food that they need to survive. Looking at the 4-year institutions, 36% said they did not have access to the food that they needed to survive in the past 30 days. And then we also talk about in this conversation housing insecurity. So do students have a place that they live that is, secure, that they can rely on to go to day in and day out as a refuge from our everyday lives? Looking at 2-year institutions, 46% said that in the last year they were insecure regarding housing at some point. Looking at 4-year institutions, 36% of students said that they did not have a place to stay at some point in the past year. So at this time, I am going to hand it over to Ted Granger, president of United Way, and he's going to talk about Alice, a little background on the report, and how it's a new way of looking at the financially struggling population in Florida. Ted, I'm handing it over to you now.
Great, thank you, Kimberly. Boy, those numbers are pretty shocking that you just read off, and the Alice report actually has some pretty interesting and shocking numbers itself. To let you know who I am and a little bit about Alice and the United Way, I'm Ted Granger. I run the United Way of Florida. We're a 2.5-person office in Tallahassee that provides services to Florida's 30 United Ways. Those 30 United Ways provide services in all 67 counties, and I know there's at least one, maybe a couple of them who are working with their local LCANs, and we're very excited about that. Kimberly, thanks so much to you and your colleagues at FCAN for providing this opportunity for us to help spread the word about Alice and help folks know a little bit more about it. For some of you may know about United Way, and others may just know about the NFL advertisements that are on Sundays and now Mondays and Thursdays. But historically, United Ways, which have been around for over 100 years, have provided funding to a set group of partner United Ways that have provided services to their community, the Boy Scouts, the Red Cross, et cetera. But several years ago, as I say, probably 10 to 20 years ago, we started having discussions with corporate CEOs around the country who said, my employees and I have been giving to the United Way for years, and nothing ever seems to change. It's like we're dumping our money down a big black hole. So United Way has listened to that and said, we can't be everything to everybody. We need to start targeting our dollars to really make a difference and move the needle in our communities around the state and around the country. So in the last 20 years or so, United Ways have moved from that. We have a set number of partner agencies. We give them money every year to do really important work, to we're going to continue to do important work with part of our dollars, particularly provide a safety net for those who need food and housing and shelter, et cetera, on an emergency basis. But we're going to target the majority of our dollars on issues that our communities say are the biggest issues that they're facing. And then we're going to identify with our communities strategies to address those issues, and we're going to provide funding to agencies to solve those issues or address them. And we've seen a great deal of change over the last 20 years as United Ways and the initiatives that we've supported with our partners in our communities have indeed made a difference. But as we went through that process over the last 10 years or so, 5 to 10 years, a United Way up in New Jersey said, this is good, but who are we really serving? Many people across the country felt like, well, United Way is there to serve the really poor people, the people who can't work, folks in our community who are disabled and can't get out of their house, which is all true. But this United Way of Northern New Jersey commissioned a study from Rutgers to find out who this population was we serve. And it turns out that the vast majority of people who United Ways are serving are people who we call ALICE. They are asset limited, income constrained, but employed. And that last word is a word that many people didn't associate with the people that United Ways have served traditionally. But the fact is, those are the people that we've served. They're the people who we see every day in every walk of life, almost everywhere we go, working at the grocery stores and hospitals, child care workers, retail stores, hotels, 7-Elevens, you name it. They're everywhere. And in Florida, 45% of the people who live in Florida live under the ALICE threshold. The ALICE threshold is a budget based on each county's cost of living, et cetera, that basically says if you don't earn this much or make this much, you can't afford the basics of life. And Holly will be getting into that with you in just a little bit. The bottom line is in Florida and in several states around the country that have embarked upon this ALICE initiative, that ALICE has become the backbone for much of what we do. The programs that we have, the communications that we have, and the conversations that we're having in our communities. And we look forward to having those conversations with you all in your communities around Florida as we move forward. I will come back on in a little while to answer questions with Holly, but at this point, I will turn it over to Holly. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Ted. And as Ted talked about, the ALICE report just really made me excited to join you today. And so that's me. I'm Holly Bullard, currently the interim co-executive director at the Florida Policy Institute. And just a little bit about the Institute before I go into the ALICE work. Our mission is to advance state policies and budgets that improve the economic mobility and quality of life for all Floridians. And we do this primarily through thoughtful and objective analysis of state policy issues that includes things around economic mobility like ALICE, income, but vastly also looking at the budget and the budget process, investments in education, criminal justice, lots of different areas that affect ALICE and others in the state. We are an independent, nonpartisan nonprofit, and that's our website at the bottom, and you can tweet at Florida Policy to tweet the Florida Policy Institute. I'm also very thrilled and honored to join TED's ALICE Research Advisory Committee, the United Way of Florida's committee that helps to support the research aspect to the ALICE report and help to make sure that it's the very best. And we're really excited to have this opportunity to talk to everyone today around the ALICE report because there's upcoming releases, and we wanted to really whet your appetite around some new research coming out, but really to also overview and give you a snapshot of what's happening in terms of ALICE and financial struggle in Florida. So next slide. As Ted mentioned, the ALICE research really looks at local levels of cost of living to determine how much does it really take and how much does it cost to survive in that community. And it can be county by county, and we look at community. So there's information about your community in Florida specifically in the report, and we'll provide links to you later on in the webinar around that. But in terms of the overall budget for Florida, what's the very basic for just getting by? And by this, we really mean very, very conservative levels of income and funding for different areas. And when you look at housing, for example, for a single adult, we'd look at a one bedroom or studio, $609. That's very rare to find an apartment like that in the state of Florida, much less in some areas in the state. And so this is a very, very conservative figure. We want to stress that because some of the numbers can be very large in terms of percentages of families in communities in the state living beneath the ALICE threshold, but wanting to draw attention back to the fact that all of these figures are very, very conservative in terms of what it costs to actually go to work, have transportation, provide food for your family, healthcare, etc. Now this chart shows the increase in percentage in the last column to the right between 2007 2015. So over the course of the recession and then coming out of the recession, the recovery, you see that the inflationary effects have been stark, especially in housing, healthcare, and in other areas. And even though income has increased, these inflationary pressures have far outstripped that, especially for our ALICE families. And lastly, for this chart, I wanted to draw your attention to that family of four in the middle, that middle column. Their childcare cost is significantly actually more than their housing cost. And when you read the ALICE report, you'll actually find that each county, that's the case, where the childcare for this family is more expensive than housing, which that's something that needs to be addressed. And how do we talk about a working family being able to afford economic mobility and investing in the future for their kids if childcare basics is so stagnant in terms of is such a significant figure. Lastly, the annual total for the family of four for the ALICE threshold for 2015 for Florida, $53,856. And that's the very basic for a two-bedroom apartment. The expenses you see here, healthcare, transportation, that is more than double the federal poverty level rate. And so this is really undergirds the perspective that the federal poverty level is outmoded and needs some attention in terms of being an appropriate measure for poverty in our state and our communities. And I'll go into that a little bit in the next slide. So the methodology for ALICE is really deep and in-depth for each of these different budget line items. They come from different corners of the government. You have HUD, fair market rent for housing. It's the 40th percentile in that region, so it's very, very conservative. Childcare comes from a group called Childcare Aware. It's a national group that looks at the actual cheapest legal home-based childcare. So this isn't really the quality care that you'd want to send your child to necessarily for the brain development that's so critical at that age. This is the cheapest legal home-based care. Food is the USDA thrifty level, which is such a low amount that it really depends on no eating out, really couponing or what have you, BOGOing. It's extremely careful planning, which in itself would take a lot of effort and planning and time. Transportation looks at the labor statistics, consumer expenditure survey, and same with healthcare. And taxes, of course, is the IRS. Now, I would like for you all to actually take a second and look at this list and think, what out of your budget or what does your family spend dollars on or save money on in terms of your day-to-day lives that's missing from this methodology, from this ALICE budget? And that's really key when we think about what our ALICE families need and supports and why they would be quote unquote asset limited, those first two letters of ALICE. Asset limited, in order to build assets, you need to be able to save some dollars, maybe save for retirement, save for a down payment on a home, sometimes just save for a down payment on your next apartment. And there's no place here for savings. There's not a component here that would allow you for that necessarily. So savings, investment, and education for yourself, for your kids. There's a lot of important components of a prosperous life that are missing from the ALICE budget. Next slide. And so here we have two maps. On the left, there's a map that shows by state the federal poverty rates. This is actually 2016 as well. This is a little bit updated, but the federal poverty level rates by state. And compare that to, on the right, the percent below ALICE threshold. So that is poverty and ALICE families put together. So that's when we talk about below ALICE threshold, it's both of those groups put together. And what is so striking is the difference between these two maps. That you can see that on the left, definitely Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Arkansas, some of the deep South areas which have had issues with poverty for a longer period of time, and maybe their poverty is something that is broadly known or what have you. But then you look to the right map, to the map on the right, and there's states that don't always pop out in terms of conversations around endemic poverty. So whether that be California, New York, Michigan, and Florida. As you see, we're one of the darker blue states on the right, and that has everything to do with cost of living in Florida and the fact that we are the most rent burdened state in the nation, and there's lots of other economic effects happening there. But the poverty map on the left doesn't tell the whole story, and that's really one of the highlights of the webinar that we want you to take away with you. Next slide. Another top line for the webinar is really all of these different line items for the ALICE budget. All of these different areas of our lives are really intricately connected. Not only our lives, ALICE lives on a financial tightrope where one flat tire, one busted serpentine belt in your car can lead to lost hours, maybe even a lost job, an inability to really function, and it can really have a cascading effect. So the inability to invest in your education, if you're planning to go back to school, but then you have to reinvest in your car suddenly, or if you need to all of a sudden have to use dollars that you were planning to go to school, perhaps on a down payment on a new apartment because something happened and there was a landlord issue. And all of these components are connected where one budget line item runs into the next. And so if there's anything to take away from this slide, it's really the fact that all of the areas of ALICE and all of our lives really are so connected, and health is more and more known by researchers and community members alike, that we see that 80% of our health indicators are actually mostly influenced by social determinants. So these other factors in life, so stress and stressing over finance, or being well educated, having the ability to have some slack in your life to deal with these health indicators or go to the doctor, et cetera. So everything is tightly woven together, and when you are in ALICE and live beneath the ALICE threshold, you are on a tightrope that doesn't allow for really one mistake without it kind of cascading out. So there's a true psychological wear and tear as well, and that's the element behind this slide. Next slide. So trends. So Alice is both a person, that's the family that we talked about in the last slide. They are working and just getting by. But Alice also is a tremendous wealth of data, and I encourage you to find your local data within the reports that we'll share. But the trends for Florida are also interesting broadly over time, and I'll share some sneak peeks at the next report in terms of what we're looking at down our most recent. So this graph that you're looking at can be a little bit confusing, but let me talk you through it. So the different color blues, you have the deepest blue is the percent of the whole state, Florida, that in households that live beneath the federal poverty level. That's that one number that we mentioned that doesn't seem to be a very good measure, but it's deep poverty for us in the state. Then you have the middle blue, which is the ALICE families that live above the poverty level, but still live beneath the amount that is determined locally that it would take to get by in that community. And then above AT, the light blue, that's above the ALICE threshold. And this trend is telling because it's from before and then through the recession and into recovery. And you see on the right-hand side in yellow, the yellow diamonds actually indicates total households for the state of Florida in thousands. So you see we were a bit stagnant and we're growing, which is a good thing for our state. And you see that the fact that ALICE and poverty increased from the recession, and it's slowly getting a little bit better, but we're still not quite there to where we were pre-recession. Next slide. So if we dive a little deeper into the data, which is always a fun thing to do, especially around different demographic areas and different types of families. And for Florida, one of the things that we care a lot about are different households of householders of different ages, and to really see what the demographic changes have been over time. These two graphs show on the left households led by someone under the age of 25. So this is the economic picture through from before the recession and into 2015 for families or households led by someone under 25. And you see that their ALICE rate and their poverty rate is much higher, much greater percentage-wise than other subgroups. But what I want to draw your attention to especially is the total number of households led by someone under 25, that it dipped because of the recession, really, and it hasn't recovered. And so we've seen a dip of about a third in those types of households being led by someone under 25. And the next graph to the right that you see, 25 to 44, also has a slight dip, and they also have a bit of a higher economic struggle in terms of ALICE and poverty compared to the state overall. But when you look at these two slides and compare them to the next slide, so next slide, in terms of households led by both 45 to 64 and then 65 and older, you see those households growing. And so when we think of who ALICE is and what our state's economy needs to think through the future, and in terms of supports for households, who are those households and how are they shaping? From the previous slide, you saw those dips in household pure numbers, and these are both growing. So households being led by 45 and older are growing, and especially this last graph of 65 and older households. And so the next slide, if you compare the first graph, under 25 to 65 and older, you can really see what's happening here. If you think through the recession and some of the trends in terms of household formation that have been happening, we see that there's, for under 25 and younger households in Florida, and this is endemic for the whole nation, and we just happen to see it heightened in our state, that it's difficult to break out on your own and to do what's called household formation. And within the mid 2000s, a lot of the growth of our economy and a lot of our economic improvement in different time periods has really been tied to household formation. So striking out on your own, buying a new home, filling it with furniture, hiring people to build homes, hiring new school teachers, new communities. And that's really where you see a lot of economic stimulus. But without that household formation and perhaps some of these younger families and some of these younger Alice families actually moving in and doubling up with households of that are led by someone of the baby boom generation or older. And that's been a trend that doesn't seem to be reversing, even though we are coming out of, we are seeing a deeper recovery over time. So the last, I think I have a picture here just to draw home. Here's a beautiful multi-generational family together. And so I think in terms of cultural norms and how we think about housing and how we build housing, where it is, all of these things need to be drawn into account in terms of our discussions of policy and how people react and where Alice is moving and how they're moving together. Next slide. Okay, so here's a bit of a preview for our next Alice reveal. And actually on the bottom of the slide, you see the website. This is for the National Alice Project, which is a fantastic website. I highly recommend it. It has local county data that's accurate for 2016, and that's where I drew this information from. And I wanted to give a new perspective and a new trend. If you've been on an Alice webinar before or read the report, this is new information for you. And in terms of the percent of families living beneath the Alice threshold for 2015, you see 44%, and into 2016, actually that increasing to 45.9% for the state. Meanwhile, poverty within that actually fell, and you see poverty for the state, the federal poverty level rate falling. And even this month, the census released data on 2017, and the federal poverty rate looked better for the state of Florida. And that's where the Alice report and this information comes in handy, is when we're looking at the big picture of cost of living and what it looks like for Florida, because you see that 32% still live within the Alice measure of above poverty, but beneath what it takes to get by in Florida. And so even though the poverty situation sounds good, and it is going in a good direction in terms of the federal poverty level, and you may have seen that in your local newspaper or on the news talking about Florida's poverty rate, which is, that in itself is good news, but without this bigger perspective, it really leaves a hole in terms of how we approach economic development, workforce, et cetera, what's truly going on in our community. So there's a new tidbit for you. Next slide. And just as well, visualizing is really important, and I think it's fun to make maps. So, so here we are, 2007 to 2015. What does this look like at the county level versus the statewide trend that you just saw? So 2007, I would like to highlight that the counties that are blank or white in 2007, most of them, we did not have enough information at the local level at that time. So it's not that they did not have any Alice at the moment. So there are some important trends to take note, even between these two maps, of pre-recession and into the recovery, especially around Central Florida and South Florida. Where Central Florida, we see a lot of really migration into the state. That's the song of Florida is welcoming to the rest of the United States, and we have been growing. And within this time period, between these two maps, we surpassed New York as to become the third largest state by population. And so those folks go to where some jobs are, but unfortunately, a lot of the jobs in those areas aren't enough to get you over the ALICE threshold in those regions. And so you see growth in those areas, Central Florida, South Florida, of ALICE, and inclusive of some of the other areas as well. Additionally, so before we go to the next slide, I want to preface that this is a quick and dirty map put together by Holly, but it's not necessarily going to be representative in terms of the look of it, but the data should be correct. And so I wanted to give folks on the webinar a sneak peek as to the 2016 map and how that looks. And this map is actually, it's not just percentages, this is a map of change between 2015 to 2016. And so let me talk you through this. The darker, the blue, you have darker blue and a little bit lighter blue. Those are where the numbers improved, or i.e. the ALICE and poverty, or the percentage of families living beneath the ALICE thresholds decreased. And you see between the darkest blue between 8 to 11%. So some real improvement in some of these areas, 4 to 7%, the lighter blue. And green, even, especially for some of these larger counties, Hillsborough, Osceola, Dade County, slight improvements between 15 and 16 in terms of percent living below the ALICE threshold. And that's in the middle, that's what BAT stands for in this context, below ALICE threshold. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have the yellow, the orangey red, and the red, and those are all counties that saw their ALICE, or the percentages of families living beneath ALICE increase anywhere from 0 to 10%. So again, what to take away from this map is that we talk about this state overall, our economy, the trends in poverty, the trends in unemployment, et cetera. But this is a state of so many different communities that have seen very different and diverging outcomes from the recovery from the recession. And so it's really important to look local and to use ALICE data locally. Next slide. Another really important and interesting area that ALICE allows us to pursue and to evaluate is really disparities in race and ethnicity around economic struggle in different communities. Of course, poverty census data allows us to do this as well. It's really important to what we call disaggregate our data to make sure that rather than just the big picture, that we see the big trend, but we also see how it's impacting different subgroups differently. And we see that in our state, that not only are there different counties either going one way or the other in terms of increasing ALICE or decreasing percent of ALICE, we see within those counties subgroups being affected differently. And actually, I want to start by highlighting some good news to me that I think is a interesting tale, which is Pasco County. So Pasco's here with the yellow arrow, and comparatively, there are still disparities by race in terms of ALICE and poverty, which is what this graph displays within Pasco County, but they're much, much smaller, between 4 and 5% disparities between white African American, Hispanic households compared to some of our other counties that see much larger disparities. Another interesting story to look into, data is always telling you stories, is that some of our counties, some of the Asian communities aren't faring as well as in other communities. So you look at Pasco, where 32% of Asian families living in Pasco County are living beneath the ALICE thresholds. In Lee County and in Miami-Dade County, it's 48%. And this also I want to emphasize why, and that this really reinforces the idea of digging deeper into your data, even from here. So we've disaggregated by general race and ethnicity categories, but just as communities are different, we have uh, different types of communities depending upon country of origin or region of origin. And because Asia is a very large continent, there's many different types of communities that come and have taken hold in Florida. And it just so happens that Lee and Miami-Dade have a much larger Southeast Asian immigrant community that have historically seen different types of impacts of discrimination, et cetera. And so they have different outcomes. So this is really important to keep in mind as we disaggregate the ALICE data even more, that what's the story behind the data. But and I still want to learn a little bit more around Pasco County. So if you're in Pasco County, I'd like to touch base. Next slide. Another thing that's really interesting for the ALICE report is that last fall, they released national data. So the website that I talked about before, and we'll give it to you again, unitedwayalice.org. You can go in there and you can look at Florida and you can compare it to all states now, that there's lots of information that compares lots of different states and really looks at the underlying forces causing some of this, and that there's, as many of us know inherently and or have been researchers or advocates in this area in terms of affordable housing, Florida, comparatively to other states where the ALICE research has been done, Florida has a huge gap in affordable units for ALICE families, not only very low income families, but ALICE as well. And so you see the gap being 783,000 units. That's, at 750,000 units in a state of 20 million. That's a huge amount. And so how do we think through these different types of barriers as well? There's this data, there's other data as well available that you can compare either from your local community or also look broadly at the nation as a whole. Next slide. I wanted to include this graph, and it's not from the ALICE data. This is actually from Raj Chetty, a researcher that is famous for looking at IRS returns and data from the IRS to track families over time, to look at what we would call economic mobility, or really just the ability to lift up your kids so that they are better off than you, and maybe make it into what is quote unquote the next quintile or quartile of income distribution, but really just to see if your kids can make it so that they're a little bit better off than you, and to continue that process so that generationally you've built a ladder out for ALICE into economic prosperity. This graph shows the regions. He actually did regions a little bit broader than counties, but looked at regions in terms of the likelihood for any given child in that area of reaching the top 20% of income, given their parents started in the bottom 20%. And there's something going on here. This isn't just a unified issue across the United States, but truly you see zip code and communities fare differently in terms of their ability to really jumpstart their children into the next phase and give them those springboards into another economic strata. Florida doesn't fare very well, and that's one thing to think about. Is it's not just ALICE as a snapshot, it's not just income at that moment. This is a generational component of building assets and building structures so that families can pass along those assets and lift up the next generation. Now, Florida College Access Network and the work that Kim mentioned before, most definitely the number one solution to this, how we look at our higher education attainment in our state, and how do we directly impact the fact that Florida doesn't appear very well on this map. Next slide. So now I'd like to move to what different groups and how United Ways and other nonprofits and researchers have been using the ALICE work and the ALICE data and really the ALICE narrative to drive change around policy, whether that be in government or in private life with employers. Next slide. So here's a slide with advocates using ALICE for their work and to advocate on behalf of policies promoting promoting ALICE and helping ALICE along. So on the left, you see the United Ways brought together groups from across the state to promote both the 2017 ALICE report and also their legislative agenda directly tied to ALICE and the needs of ALICE in terms of work supports and specifically the earned income tax credit and drawing those dollars down. You see in the middle here an infographic that they used in terms of promoting the earned income tax credit as a boost to family income for ALICE, and really as a tool to really drive this home for folks. This is something that you can use as you look locally and what ALICE looks like for your community, for your county, as we get more data out, maybe even more granular to, within your zip code, so that you can use this information to share the importance and the relevance for whatever type of advocacy, whatever type of policies you're advocating that would connect. So whether that be affordable housing or transportation, in terms of investing in transportation, whether that be reducing some restrictions around backgrounds to improve ALICE that maybe they have a background in the justice system and that's a barrier to work. So there's all sorts of really pertinent policies and or even personnel policies within employment that can be impacted when you start with ALICE, when you show data and explain who ALICE is and that they're a neighbor, a nurse, a cashier, they're the teacher's assistant, et cetera. They're our neighbors. On the right, you actually see the CEO of United Way Suncoast down there in Tampa Bay, Sarasota area, and Suzanne speaking with Vern Buchanan, so Congressman Buchanan, and leading with ALICE and showing him the ALICE report and really discussing why. Why is this important? Well, it's because of ALICE. So it's a really powerful advocacy tool. I highly recommend you take a look at it and think about it if you have plans for whether that be local, city, state policy. Next slide. Another really interesting component and something that if you have at your behest a group, a university or college intern that is handy in what's called GIS mapping, all of the data necessary is free and it's available right now on United Way Florida's website for you to make nifty maps like this. And data is great, but visualizations really bring it home in terms of where the need is and how you can affect a policy discussion regarding geography and different areas. So you see this is a Leon County map that we put together, and that this was actually presented to the Leon County Commission with the United Way of the Big Bend up there. So this is it's an advocacy tool as well, and it helps to really guide work in terms of where we're best to invest. Next slide. So other innovative ways we've seen the ALICE report being used. One, in terms of employers. So large employer moving to a new place in Southwest Florida actually shared with us that after they came to an ALICE event, they used that to try to determine best how to pay and to create some employment policies that supported ALICE, because they knew that high turnover was definitely a detriment in terms of their growth, and that the local cost of living and other important policies that support workers. So whether that be transportation, childcare, et cetera, that they were thinking broadly about that. And so using it to guide wage discussions, to provide evidence of the need, and to posit that it would reduce turnover for employers. Also, social service program eligibility standards. We've seen not only United Ways, but other nonprofits look to alter some of their eligibility standards because perhaps they were based previously on the federal poverty level, which, as we've talked about today, can be is rather an artful measure of the financial struggle locally. And so to be more attuned and in tune with their communities, some social service agencies and program providers have been altering their eligibility standards. And even some have been altering their requests for proposals for grants in order for nonprofits and perhaps employer partners to really speak to the fact that they pay at an ALICE level or that they support ALICE in different ways, and just to be cognizant of the need to address the need to infuse the conversation with this new narrative. So next slide. And with that, I'd actually like to turn it back to Ted so that we could hear a little bit about what's coming up for the next ALICE. I showed you a couple slides of some new data, but there's a lot more to come, and there's ways for you to get involved. Ted?
Thank you, Holly. That was great. And as we saw from one of the beginning slides there, if you take the folks below poverty and you add the folks who are and many of whom are working, and then add the other group that is above the poverty line, all of whom are working, the ALICE population, those living below the ALICE threshold, it's almost half of the people in the state of Florida. That to me, when I saw the first ALICE report, was the most eye-opening figure that I saw. I couldn't imagine that when I go out at night and I look around, half the people around me almost are people who live paycheck to paycheck and struggle to pay their bills. We're planning on the trend lines, Holly, that you showed were really great. They go back to 2007. And we're continuing to build those ALICE trend lines by continuing to have reports come out every other year so that we can generate that wealth of information that really helps us to dig into the weeds and find out what's going on with the ALICE population in a variety of ways. We are going to actually, Holly mentioned that she sits on the research advisory committee that we've put together in Florida for ALICE. That research advisory committee is made up of individuals from many walks of life who are engaged in research. We have representatives from the Federal Reserve, from universities around Florida, from the Florida Chamber, and their research department, and a number of others. They're going to be reviewing the next iteration, the 2018 ALICE report, in the near future, and we will be releasing it early next year at a Capitol Press Conference, where hopefully we can get a little bit more juice out of the release that will assist us with our public policy initiatives, all of which are targeted to assist the ALICE households in our family or in our state. So that's what's coming up in terms of that. It's my understanding too, and we'll find out in a week, that the new ALICE report will take it down to zip code levels in our counties, so that you will be able to note by zip code where they're doing well and where they're not doing quite as well. So that's the update on where we are now. Kimberly, were you going to handle any questions that might come up?
Yeah, so I'm going to touch on a few things before we move ahead to questions. So if you enjoyed this webinar is part of our webinar series that FCAN hosts throughout the months. We have another one coming up later this month, which we're really excited about, exactly 3 weeks from today. So it is Better Together, How Collective Impact 3.0 helps communities collaborate for greater student success. And we are so excited. Kathy McDonald in an FCAN office is going to be hosting Liz Weaver, who is the co-CEO of Tamarack Institute, one of the premier thought leaders in the collective impact space. And then we are also so lucky to have Lisa Church, Vice President from Champions for Learning and the backbone leader of our LCAN Future Ready Collier down in Collier County. And if you're interested in that, it will be on Tuesday, October 23rd at 1 p.m. And you can sign up and learn more information on our website at the link below. The last thing I'm going to mention is that our summit is set and we have the date. So we want you to hold that date. So that 2019 FCAN Summit, the theme is Candid Conversations. We hope that you will save the date and attend. It is May 7th and 8th, that should say 19, still in 2018 brain right now, at the Rosen Center Hotel in Orlando, Florida. And currently the call for proposals for breakout session is open. And it is open until October 15th. If you're interested, you can visit our website, floridacollegeaccess.org/events, to find out more about what we're looking for in our breakout sessions and then access the link to submit. So now it looks like we have a few minutes for questions, and I'm looking through our list right now. Holly, it looks like we have one question, or Ted, you can take this one too, asking about transportation in the ALICE budget. Specifically, does this budget for one car, two cars? Is it public transit that we're looking at? Can you just give us some more details on that?
So Ted, I could probably take that one.
Okay, thank you.
So with the transportation budget, it's fairly interesting as well because the ALICE research team looks locally at each community of the counties to see what percentage of the workers there actually use public transportation to work. And so if there's not over a certain threshold, which I believe is 8%, but I can follow up with you on that they use the just very basic one car cost of insurance and basic gas, but very, very low. And actually there's other transportation indicators, and there's other transportation in terms of looking at the costs for transportation. There's other indicators that actually peg it much higher in the state of Florida. So it's an extremely conservative number within the ALICE report, but it is really one car. And so you can imagine the back and forth with the family in terms of more than one job.
Thanks, Holly. And it looks like no more questions are coming through. So Holly and Ted, any last minute words to the group here today?
I guess I would say, all the folks on the phone are in positions in your community and in your employment where you can think about how your organization can help ALICE students. I know here in Tallahassee at TCC, they have considered, how they can, in the way that they do their work, assist ALICE students who are coming in and struggling. I understand the Heart of Florida United Way in Orlando is working with the LCAN there to support access by ALICE students to post-secondary credentials and helping them sustain that and prevail in terms of attaining those degrees. There's a lot of things to think about. If you have any questions about what you can do, how you can do it, who you can do it with, please don't hesitate to connect with Holly or I. Thanks.
Thanks, Ted. And with that, this now ends our webinar featuring the ALICE report, the United Way ALICE report. And I just want to give a very sincere and thankful thank you to Ted and Holly for putting this together and giving us some real tangible, actions moving ahead on using this data in our local communities. Thank you all for attending. We hope to see you again at a future FCAN webinar, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Thanks, Kim.